Sounds of war get louder in Yemen. Saudi Arabia's king orders the National Guard to join the campaign against Houthi rebels as the U.S. sends more warships to the Arabian Sea to intercept Iranian arms shipments. 20 years in jail without parole. Ousted Egyptian President Mohamed Morsi is sentenced as Amnesty slams the verdict as a travesty of justice and calls for his release. The deadliest ever shipwreck in the Mediterranean. The UN raises the fear's death toll to over 800 people.
The news today with Lucy Aharish.
Good evening. In less than 2 minutes, Israel begins to mark the National Memorial Day, or Yom HaZikaron, to honor its 23,320 fallen soldiers and civilian victims of wars and terrorism. A minute-long siren will sound throughout the country just moments from now, during which Israelis stop everything and stand in silence. Over the past year, 116 soldiers and civilians lost their lives, many of those during last summer's 7-week war with Hamas. We will go right now live to the Kotel, where we will just in a few seconds hear the 1-minute siren for the honor of the civilians and soldiers that lost their lives in Israel. Yes, we just heard right now the 1 minute of siren that was sounded all over Israel. And with me right now from Jerusalem's Mount Herzl is correspondent Shai Ben-Ari. Good evening, Shai. So, Shai,
with that siren you just heard,
yes, you can continue.
Yeah, so with the siren that you just heard, that marked the beginning of the ceremony at the Western Wall in the Old City of Jerusalem. The ceremony will include a speech by the Israeli president himself, Reuven Rivlin, who will be speaking in a matter of moments. After him, the Israeli Chief of Staff, the Chief of Staff of the IDF, of course, Major General Gadi Eisenkot, will also be speaking. To this day, 23,320 Israelis have fallen in the line of duty, with 116 joining that unfortunate list over the past year alone, mainly, of course, as a result of Operation Protective Edge. Also, 2,538 Israelis have been killed to this day in acts of terrorism. Basically, the Memorial Day in Israel starts this evening, but it will continue into Wednesday, into tomorrow, when around 1.5 million Israelis will be visiting the various military cemeteries that dot this country. That's nearly a fifth of the population, to give you a sense of just how personal this day gets for a large portion of Israelis.
Yeah, and today, Shai, it was a surprising note got all over the news that the Defense Ministry decided to put a sign of Mohammed Abu Khdeir, the boy that was killed, that was murdered during just before Operation Protective Edge by extremist from the Jewish side. His sign is going to be in Mount Herzl, just around and alongside his picture, just along all the victims and all the great people, great leaders of Israel on the same mountain. This was a surprising move.
Right, an interesting decision by the Israeli government, and one that has caused something of an uproar within Israeli society. The etching of the name of Mohammed Abu Khdeir, of course, as you mentioned, the 15-year-old boy who was murdered basically by Jewish youths in somewhat of an act of revenge for the abduction of 3 Israeli youths earlier last summer. This decision effectively recognizes or characterizes Mohammed Abu Khdeir as a victim of terrorism. Now, this has caused some uproar in different circles, amongst them Abu Khdeir's family, with his father actually calling for his name to be removed, as well as the organization known as Al-Maghor, which represents victims of terrorism. They have also called for his name to be removed, as they see Abu Khdeir as a victim of Abu Khdeir's death as a victim of criminal activity. So this is probably the kind of debate you could only see in Israel, and a reminder that perhaps politics are never far away, even on the most somber of days.
Yes, Shai Ben Ari, thank you very, very much for this. Ali, do you agree? Is it an act, was this murder an act of criminal act and not a terror act?
This was a terror act, but the tragedy of this region, Lucy, is even the family of the victim here, the family of Abu Khdeir, was in between the pressure of the Palestinian community, who did not welcome the fact that the Israelis are honoring the memory of Abu Khdeir, and demanded the family to condemn this Israeli decision, and to declare that they have nothing to do with this Israeli decision. From the Israeli side, of course, the fact that they are using the name of Abu Khdeir is a way to say that we have the sovereignty over Jerusalem, and a citizen of East Jerusalem is an Israeli citizen. And it's like a pity that this evening there is also this political discourse, this political debate, and I'd rather prefer that the Israelis, the Israeli authorities, would not go into this decision without consulting the family and explaining the consequences that might take place.
Unfortunately, I know, Amir, that you want to answer. I just, the camera is still not on you exactly, but let's move, and I will let you react when we start with our next part. And we move now from this somber evening in Israel to elsewhere in the Middle East, to Yemen and the Arabian Sea, where the drums of war seem to be getting louder. Now in the 4th week of the Saudi-led campaign against Houthi rebels there. Saudi Arabia's King Abdullah has ordered the National Guard to join the campaign. The Guard is a well-equipped military ground force. At the same time, in the Arabian Sea, more U.S. warships have been deployed to intercept Iranian ships, potentially transferring weapons to the Houthis. We'll look at this, and I will hear also Amir's reaction. But first, let's take a look back.
نحن في المقاومة الشعبية في تعز سندحر العداء الذين أتوا من كهوف مران، سندحرهم وسيعودون إلى كوفة إن شاء الله.
WFP is extremely concerned about the impact of the conflict on the people of Yemen. It's one of the poorest countries on earth, and hunger was an enormous problem even before this crisis.
صنعاء وأطرافها والمستودعات الذخيرة متواجدة فيها، واستهدفت في صنعاء بالذات خلال ال 24 ساعة الماضية.
Yes, and with me as we started, and you saw him before, Middle East analyst Ali Waqid. Good evening. Thank you very much for coming. And also defense and government analyst Amir Oren for Arts Daily newspaper. Good evening. I promised you that you will, of course, react to what we opened with, and putting the sign for Mohammed Abu Khdeir in Mount Herzl. What do you have to say about that?
It's a classic case of a bureaucratic decision with political undertones, because once Mohammed Abu Khdeir was pronounced a terror victim by the Israeli authorities almost a year ago, the decision not to put him on the wall at Mount Herzl would have had to be taken by someone in authority. The default was that he is among all the other terror victims. And one can imagine what would have happened if there was such a decision not to include him. Now that he was included as part of a routine decision, obviously all of these problems that Ali mentioned earlier have come to the fore, because he's an Israeli resident, de facto annexation of East Jerusalem, Israeli sovereignty. On the other hand, Palestinians not wanting him to be in the company of Israeli soldiers. This is the Middle East.
I want to take what you said, and I don't know if you meant it, Ali, in this way, but it is a day where you remember this boy, and he is part of a victim of the terror attacks that we saw here in Israel. So I really find it really unfortunate that we are putting politicals debate in it. I wish that we wouldn't in the media, in Israel media.
We don't live in an idealist
but
world,
to start
Lucy. And the two communities see terror in a very different way. For the Palestinians, terror is on one side. For the Israelis, terror is on the other side. And this shows how deep is the mistrust between the two communities. And even the fact that mooning cannot bridge over the differences between the two communities. This shows how deep is the tragedy. And instead of being a bridge between Palestinians and Israelis, Eastern people of East Jerusalem are in the middle of this tension, in the middle of this hostility.
And this
There
is
is
so
another
unfortunate.
point, because for many years, Israeli families of terror victims have fought to be included in this ceremony, and the bereaved families of fallen soldiers have resisted it. And they said that people in uniform were sent by the government, by the military, and they should have another standing, a higher standing than mere victims of terror acts. So it's so complicated here.
Yeah, it is complicated, but you know, a death is a death, and a mourning is a mourning, and a terror is terror, whether it's from the Jewish side or from the Arab side. It is the same thing, because at the end of the day, families, fathers, mothers lost their children. So I don't understand. I really don't understand.
And when Palestinians and Israelis join to commemorate this day in an alternative way, there is also this crisis among some families, some associations that say that should be one mainstream consensual event, and there should be no alternatives. And some of these alternatives try to bridge between the two societies, try to explain what you just said, that mourning and death is death, and terror is terror, and violence is violence, and it is about time.
But this is why I think, in my own opinion, this is why this ceremony that we're just watching right now should be one ceremony for everyone. And in this ceremony, I think that tonight there's going to be something historical and historic in this ceremony, because for the first time we will hear Arabic song in this ceremony, which is for the Druze soldier, commemorating the Druze soldier that was killed in the Har Nof terror attack. So this is also, I think that this ceremony should establish itself and should turn itself to one big Israeli ceremony, Arab, Jewish, for all the terror victims. And really, I find it really, I will just tell to our viewers that the parents of Mohammed Abu Khdeir are having an interview, an extended interview here in the Arabic channel just at 9 o'clock Israel time. And whomever understands Arabic is welcome to go to our Arabic channel and watch the interview there. Of course, we will have the interview translated in the coming days, or tomorrow or the day after. But again, it's death, it's killing, it's murder, and it's about time that we will understand that we are all human beings. But this is me. We are moving now Elsewhere, like we said, to the Middle East, to the building chaos in and around Yemen, as the Saudi king, we said, Abdullah, King Sulaiman, ordered the National Guard to join the Yemen campaign. Iran says it is optimistic regarding the chances of reaching a ceasefire. Eli Ochenberg explains.
Nearly a month into the Saudi-led military campaign in Yemen, it appears the proxy war playing out between Tehran and Riyadh is gaining a new dimension: psychological warfare. While Iran has repeatedly called for a ceasefire, Saudi Arabia and the U.S. are sending their own stark messages. Saudi King Salman issued a royal decree Tuesday stating that the country's National Guard, widely regarded as the kingdom's best-equipped ground force, will participate in operations in Yemen. His statement may be either a diplomatic ploy to weaken Iran and its allied Houthi fighters, or an actual call to expand the campaign, a scenario that seems less likely at this point. The move comes after the U.S. beefed up its naval presence in the Gulf of Aden and in the southern Arabian Sea amid suspicions a weapons convoy of 7 to 9 Iranian vessels was heading towards Yemen. The UN Security Council previously passed a formal resolution to impose an arms embargo on Houthi rebel leaders. Saudi officials have expressed great satisfaction over the first stage of the operation, which achieved most of its military aims. The next phase is set to focus on more specific targets. The big question is whether the Saudis, with Washington's backing, can further weaken Iran to the point that it is willing to forego some of its interest in Yemen, thereby arriving at a compromise.
Yeah, once again, you two are here to explain to me the chaos, and Ali, I need to understand this, because just a week ago we sat down here and I asked you, isn't it the time to put boots on the ground and just Saudi Arabia, is this the next plan? And ground operation or ground forces, this is big. This is boots on the ground. This is getting in and starting to fight.
No, we still did not see any Saudi soldier on Yemen ground. These are signs. These are also part of the psychological war that the Saudis are leading. For the moment, I don't see not only Saudis, I don't see any other country volunteering to bring its boots on the Yemenite soil. And we mentioned the historical reasons why, and that no foreign force that enter Yemen achieved its goals, like Eli Ochenberg mentioned in her report. This is a sign of the Saudis, the American Navy that move its ships towards the Arabian Sea, towards the Yemenite waters, are also parts of this signs. The administration made a compromise with the Congress to stop, to block Iran expansion as part of the understanding between the administration and the Congress about the nuclear file of Iran. But for the moment, no dramatic, no strategic change in the position, both on the political one and also on the ground.
So we're talking about maybe sentences and just words being spread again, but warships being sent to intercept Iranian warships. This is basically some kind of, because I need to understand, just they are sitting on the same table and discussing and having dinners together and, hoo-ha, humbaya, maybe singing humbaya together. And at the end of the day, they're each and every side is sending warships to the Arabian Sea and almost clashing. Explain to me this.
Well, it's even more complicated because when you talk about the negotiations with Iran, the six powers are divided among themselves, and the Americans are against the Russians in Ukraine, and there are now military exercises between Americans and Ukrainians, and on another front between Americans in the Philippines against China, another member of the six powers. But going back to the region, those American ships are coming out of the Persian Gulf. They are not coming from the Mediterranean Sea or even the Atlantic.
They were there.
They were there against Iran within the Persian Gulf, or the Arabian Gulf, as the Saudis wanted to be known. They came out of the Straits of Hormuz. They are going to replace another American aircraft carrier, the Carl Vinson. This is the Theodore Roosevelt. And they are going to implement the Security Council resolution regarding an embargo on helping the Houthis. Now, some of the interests of the Americans and of the Saudis coincide, but they are not identical. The Saudis do not want, and this is to put it mildly, they do not want the Yemenis to invade the Saudi Arabia, because the leader of the Houthis, who is called al-Houthi, sees himself as at least part of a dynasty which in the past controlled southern Saudi Arabia. So the Saudis are fearful of an invasion. For the Americans, of course, they are also fearful of an invasion, but they are against another group. And this is the AQAP, the Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, which is going to generate terror against the U.S.
Just before,
Amir mentioned coalitions, and first, this is a show of...
Just before you're starting, I'm sorry, Ali, I just want to join this conversation. Also from New York is investigative journalist Martin Himmel. Good evening.
Good evening.
So, Martin, really try to explain to me, because I don't understand this. We are going to peace, we're going to war, we're what? We're playing just like what, basketball with the Iranians? And I mean we, the United States.
Well, we, the United States, is playing compartmentalization, they call it. Meaning there's one issue called nuclear deterrence, or dealing with Iran's nuclear arsenal or potential arsenal. And then there's other issues. Well, Iran wants to export a revolution across the Middle East, but that's a completely different issue. There's no connection. Well, of course there's a connection, and many Americans are not buying it. As a matter of fact, the American media is full of this question mark. I mean, how can you ignore these different parts, especially when an American journalist just yesterday was put on, the Iranians say they are going to charge this American Washington Post journalist in Iran with spying. He's been in an Iranian prison for 9 months. All these things are big slaps at the Americans, yet the Obama administration is saying, well, we don't see that. We're just dealing with a nuclear issue. But at the same time, we're trying to stop them from getting into Yemen. About
I really try to understand. Please tell me that someone in the American administration is much smarter than we are.
I'm not so sure about that. But what they are trying to do is play different games. They're trying to play one game to isolate the Iranian exported revolution to Yemen, another game, the arsenal. And, oh, by the way, we'll not notice the fact you just imprisoned one of our journalists on false charges of spying. But what is definitely clear with Yemen is that, you know, this ship, the Theodore Roosevelt, this aircraft carrier, which is not just an aircraft carrier, it's many ships that go with it, heading to the region. And it's ironic that the ship is called the Theodore Roosevelt because Theodore Roosevelt was the inventor of the big stick policy, which means if you want to have effective foreign policy, carry a big stick. And I think that this is an American message to the Iranians when it comes to nuclear arsenals and everything else, that if you push America too hard, it will carry a big stick. Just for now, it's a small stick. Yes.
Martin, you stay with us here. I just want to keep you here just behind me. Ali, you wanted to say something, and I just want to add one small question. Just, Amir, you said, and you talked about the ships that are already there in the Arabian Sea. Where were they until now, these ships, seeing some arms shipments going in and going out? What, they were just watching, and now they're just going to...
Without a United Nations Security Council mandate, you can't just board it. You have an anti-piracy task force there. But you remember that in the 1980s, there were fights between U.S. naval vessels and Iranian ones, and the so-called reflagging operations. This was because of the Kuwaitis. But what is happening now is that the Americans want a political settlement of the Yemenite problem. In order to get that, they must keep the Houthis down. And get former President Hadi, who escaped to Saudi Arabia, back, because his predecessor, former President Saleh is joining forces with the Houthis.
It's too complicated for me.
I'm not sure that the Americans want to see the Houthis out of any political compromise in Yemen. They see the Houthis part of a political understanding in Yemen, because the Houthis out of any political arrangement mean maintaining the instability in Yemen, and this is out of question. Martin mentioned the coalitions that the Americans are maintaining or leading, but on the other hand, we are seeing that the Americans are supporting the baked Iran regime in Iraq, the Iraqi government that is fighting the forces supported by the Saudis in Iraq. And this is the very complex game that the Americans are playing, and the Americans are trying to maneuvering between the Iranians and between the Saudis. They are not giving in any way the choice to bring back the Iranians to the international community, to the international family, and to try to embolden the pragmatic forces in Iran presented by President Rouhani.
Martin, I just want to ask you, because, you know, right now in the Middle East, everything is connected to everything, and everyone is connected to everyone. And more than that, we don't see a lot of, let's say, firm boundaries between the so-called countries, if we can call them countries anymore, in the Middle East. So how can you just, in one part of the Middle East, fight Iran, and on the other part say, okay, no, it's okay what she's doing there, we will try to support Iran in this? How does it work?
Well, there's a big debate here in the United States on all those points. You have Republicans and conservatives that say it doesn't work. You have to have a sustained, consistent policy against Iran and against its revolution, and at the same time promote other Sunni countries like Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and Jordan to contain ISIS and Al-Qaeda. But then there are Democrats, supporters of Obama, who say, look, it's much more sophisticated than that. And you can make comparisons to the Cold War. There was a time when the United States was fighting Russia in Vietnam, was competing for influence in Eastern Europe, and at the same time was doing an arms limitation agreement with them during the Reagan era. So they're trying to emulate this, well, we'll fight you in some places and work with you in other places. But I don't think that comparison is very fair with Iran. Actually, I think Iran is quite consistent in the sense that they have a goal. They want to export their Shiite influence. They want to strengthen the country. I personally think they're hell-bent on getting nuclear weapons. And these negotiations just part of it, just that I don't think that President Obama really wants to see it that way.
Yes, Amir.
Well, Martin mentioned President Theodore Roosevelt and the Great White Fleet, and mostly the big stick. This stick is too heavy for the United States to carry right now, because these same Republicans who want a more militant foreign policy do not back it with a budget to fit
so how many sticks can you just hold?
Well, you can't, and the Iranians know it, and the Saudis know it, and in the Persian Gulf you have three anchors. You have Iraq, Iran, and Saudi Arabia, and there's always this fight within this triangle. The other countries, the Gulf Cooperation Council countries, are helping Saudi Arabia, but are also somewhat rivals of it when it regards other issues. And it's you have to manage it week by week, crisis by crisis. There is no long-range vision here.
You know, Ani, I want to ask you, how does Saudi Arabia watching all this situation? Because the stick, at the end of the day, has only two sides. You cannot hold it more than two sides. So how does Saudi Arabia seeing this entire mess of the United States and the way that it's?
Well, the Saudis, of course, at the end of the day, it's in 2 years they would like to see another president in the U.S. a Republican president. This is their goal. Of course, they are not willing to maintain this war in Yemen until U.S. elections of 2 years from now. But the Saudis want to see their position at the best when they come to the negotiation table, because they understand that no matter how this war in Yemen will last, at the end of the day, all the sides will be on the table, and the Saudis hope to be the strongest side when they and the Iranians, they and the Houthis are around the same table.
Yes.
For the last 25 years, the United States is militarily involved there because it came to Saudi Arabia's defense under Republican President George Bush.
That's like saying that only the right in Israel can bring peace. Martin Himmel, thank you very, very much for being with us. Amir Oren, Ali Wakid, thank you very much. Going out for a small break, 2 minutes, and I'll be back. The drums of war get louder in Yemen. Saudi Arabia's king orders the National Guard to join the campaign against Houthi rebels as the U.S. sends more warships to the Arabian Sea to intercept Iranian arms shipments. 20 years in jail without parole. Ousted Egyptian President Mohamed Morsi is sentenced as Amnesty slams the verdict as a travesty of justice and calls for his release. And the deadliest ever shipwreck in the Mediterranean, the UN raises the feared death toll to over 800 people as prosecutors build a case against traffickers. Welcome back to the news today. Former Egyptian President Mohamed Morsi was sentenced to 2 decades in prison today, along with a dozen other high-ranking Muslim Brotherhood figures. Morsi's rise to power was as quick as dramatic as his downfall, as Shai Ben-Ari explains.
Mohamed Morsi Al-Ayat is sentenced to prison for 20 years with labor and put under police surveillance, silenced for 5 years completely for using force and violence, arrest and detention, as well as physical torture.
With that, the man who served for 1 year as Egypt's first freely elected president was sent to prison. The 20-year sentence was deemed a fitting punishment for the violent crackdown led by Morsi's government against opposition protesters in 2012 who were angered by Morsi's executive decision to expand his presidential powers. Morsi and several other senior Muslim Brotherhood officials were acquitted of murder charges and thus were able to avoid the death penalty, a decision perhaps meant to prevent them from becoming symbolic martyrs. But Morsi is expected to face future trials on charges including conspiring with Hamas and Hezbollah in order to foment violence in the Sinai Peninsula following his overthrow. He is also accused of leaking state secrets to the Qatar-based Al Jazeera news network and of organizing a mass escape from a Cairo jail during the 2011 revolution which toppled former President Hosni Mubarak. In a twist of irony, Egypt's current leader was originally appointed army chief and defense minister by none other than Morsi. But President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi has since initiated a major crackdown against the Muslim Brotherhood, which is now designated in Egypt as a terrorist organization. The Brotherhood's leader, Mohammed Badia, was sentenced to death earlier this month, and the Morsi sentence is seen as merely the latest in an ongoing effort to reshape the very face of Egyptian society.
Yes, with me right now from Cairo is journalist Annabel van der Berge. Good evening. Good to see you again, Annabel.
Hello.
So, Annabel, was it predictable? We predicted this sentence. It was predicted that Mohamed Morsi will be sentenced to so-and-so years. I even was surprised that it's only 20 years.
Yeah, well, exactly. I think most of the people had thought that he would have been sentenced for death, actually. They thought that he would get life sentence or the death penalty. So it came a little bit as a surprise for a lot of people, but as has been told as well in the report, people say that this might have been chosen because in this way they avoid him of becoming a martyr, and if he becomes a martyr, that would of course benefit the whole strategy and the policy of the Muslim Brotherhood. So it seems that it has been kind of a political decision not to give him a life sentence or the death penalty, because in that way he doesn't become a martyr.
Annabelle, let's try to analyze this. Is this some kind of a will of Abdel Fattah al-Sisi to maybe do first steps of democracy, of saying, okay, we're not the past Egypt. In the past Egypt, you used to see death tolls, you used to see us giving the death sentence. But today, no. Today, we will sentence as a democratic state, and like you said, we don't want to make him a symbol.
Well, I think it's very important to say that, first of all, besides the fact that he doesn't want to make him a symbol, that we see that it's probably a political decision. And it is very important to note that the parliament, that the court itself says that it rules independently, so that it doesn't follow any political advices. But what we see now is that most probably they did follow political decisions, and they did follow the policy of the politics. So that is very frightening, of course, because it might show that he is indeed giving a little bit in and trying to walk on the democratic path. But on the other hand, we see that the court is not judging independently.
Yes, I'm trying to think who thought that the court is independent from the political way. Really, really, really naive people. Annabelle van der Bergen, thank you very, very much for this. According to the British Guardian newspaper, Islamic State leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi has been recovering for weeks from life-threatening injuries he sustained in a March airstrike in western Iraq. The Daily said that Baghdadi injuries were so severe it forced him to relinquish control of IS. Meanwhile, the UN said today that more than 114,000 people have fled the Ramadi area of Iraq's Anbar province over the past 2 weeks as the Islamic State makes advances also there. Over 800 people, that's the number of migrants feared dead in the crash of a ship in the Mediterranean Sea. As the scope of the tragedy becomes clearer, Italian officials are already holding people responsible. The 2 crew members who tried to take the migrants to Sicily and took them instead on the doomed journey. Ayman Siksik has more.
Italian prosecutors on Tuesday began building their case against the traffickers responsible for the drowning of hundreds of migrants in the Mediterranean. The president of Sicily argued that such legal moves would be in favor of the migrants.
In a meeting of the European Council in Italy, we will discuss a resolution over immigration sharing. Every country should participate in sharing the flow of migrants requesting asylum. We need to give these people the possibility of requesting asylum directly in the embassies in their countries. This way we could probably put an end to these tragedies.
The prosecutors now believe the ship sunk for 2 reasons. The smuggler captain accidentally crashed the boat into the ship that had come to its rescue. The migrants themselves then moved around on the overcrowded boat, making it capsize. The captain and another crew member are now accused of the crash. Following the new details, the United Nations revised the number of those feared drowned and called for an increase in rescue efforts.
UNHCR now believes the number of fatalities to have been over 800, making this the deadliest incident in the Mediterranean that we have recorded. We have currently a total of about 1,300 deaths in April.
The survivors were brought Tuesday to a migrant holding center in Catania. The Coast Guard, meanwhile, reported that it saved some 638 migrants in 6 different rescue operations on Monday alone. The weakened deaths have jolted the European Union into taking action, with the EU acting to prevent more boats from leaving their countries of origin.
Yes, and with me to understand a little bit more about this is Dr. Esther Lupatin, Director of the Center for European Studies at the IDC Herzliya. Good evening. Thank you very much for joining me. So really, this finger pointing at the 2 crew members that took the people from Sicily to this journey, to this journey of death. Really? These are the people that the UN is right now pointing fingers at?
I think the problem is that you have to understand that where does actually the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees get the money from? They get it from Western European countries. They get it mainly from the EU member states. So in a way, they have to criticize the behavior of the EU, but at the same time, they cannot do it too often because eventually they get most of the money from Western European members of the European Union. And eventually, I mean, like, I think that, it's not a coincidence and most boats coming now from Libya. Because what happened in the past, actually, until the death of Gaddafi, they had actually a partner in the Middle East, because in 2010, for example, there was a memorandum of understanding that was signed between the European Commission and Gaddafi. And the idea was to set a kind of to give Gaddafi, and they gave him 50 million euro. And his job was actually to prevent migrants, especially who come from Africa and trying to go to Europe through Libya, from actually preventing to go to Europe. And that was his main job. And he was doing a very good job. They had very close cooperation with him.
Paid Gaddafi.
Oh, yeah.
Not to let his own people get out of Libya.
It's the European Union that paid Gaddafi.
So this is hypocrisy. This is being really, and then saying, and then shifting what? And then they're shifting the blame to two crew members?
Yeah, I mean, you have to understand, immigration and asylum policy in the EU, like in the last 20 years, but especially now, there's a lot of criticism among the European public. And we've seen it, with the rise of right-wing and extremism in Europe, like Le Pen, other extremists all over Europe. And it's mainly because the European public is saying that, they're actually saying that European immigration and asylum policy is too soft and lenient, and EU allows too many refugees and asylum seekers entering the EU.
So what now? No Gaddafi, no leadership in the Middle East, all the horrible leaders went, and now what? How they're going to prevent this?
I think that what it's likely to happen now, I would say, is Renzi actually called for an emergency meeting, that's what he's trying to do with Hollande. I think they're likely to discuss it, but I think we are going to see more restrictive measures. And what do I mean by saying more restrictive measures? For example, the European Union in 2004 established Frontex. What is Frontex? It's a system, the idea was to try to prevent illegal migrants and refugees enter into the EU by, for example, through surveillance, using satellites and checking boats and detecting them before actually they leave, the Middle East to Europe. So what they're going to do is upgrade the system, put more money to it, so making sure that people won't be able even to board, to Europe.
What about understanding that they are people and not something else? Thank you very, very much, Dr. Al-Patni, for coming to the studio. Yes, and we are going to Boston. A day after the Boston Marathon, Boston bomber Dzhokhar Tsarnaev is back in court, where prosecutors are demanding he be condemned to death for his role in the marathon bombing 2 years ago. The story from ABC News.
This morning, the same jurors who convicted Dzhokhar Tsarnaev of bombing the 2013 Boston Marathon will enter the penalty phase of the trial, meant to answer the question, should Tsarnaev live or die? The years have done little to dim these images, the horrible memories of the attacks that killed 3 people and wounded more than 260, even as the race went on Monday. Rebecca Gregory was one of 16 bombing victims to lose a limb. She learned to walk again, then to run.
There's life after bad things that happen to you, and if I can be someone's hope or inspiration, that's what I want to do for the rest of my life.
So many runners dedicated their effort to the survivors and victims, particularly the youngest one, 8-year-old Martin Richard, who died at the finish line. But as prosecutors begin their argument to convince jurors to sentence Tsarnaev to death, a growing number of his victims are calling for a life sentence instead.
In Argentina, a prosecutor has decided not to investigate allegations that President Cristina Fernandez tried to block the inquiry into the deadly 1994 bombing of the AMIA Jewish Community Center that killed 85 people. The allegations were made by late prosecutor Alberto Nisman, who was found dead in his flat on January 18, the day before he was due to testify on his accusation. The cause of Nisman's mysterious death is still under investigation. And we're going back to Israel. Some 9,000 asylum seekers from Sudan live in Israel, fleeing an ongoing massacre in the Darfur region. Most of them are prohibited from working, and many are held in a detention facility. This week, they remember the hundreds of thousands who lost their lives and cry for an end to the slaughter of their people. Shahab Beled has the story.
We are commemorating the 12th.
The same week that Israel commemorated the Holocaust also marked the 12th anniversary of the start of the genocide in Darfur.
The situation in Darfur is so bad. It's really bad. It is something that you couldn't imagine what is going on. The government is still bombarding the civilians, targeting the civilians, killing and doing genocide against the black.
Growing racial tensions led to a campaign of ethnic cleansing against Darfur's non-Arabs in 2003. In response to emerging rebel groups, the government unleashed militias known as Devils on Horseback on black African villages in West Sudan, reportedly claiming lives of over 300,000 people.
2 million people have been displaced from Darfur since the beginning of the atrocities. We know that 400,000 were displaced only in the first half of 2014. We know that attacks on civilians continue.
The government of Sudan, they start against me and they try to arrest me many times, okay? So once they kill my friend in front of my eye, okay? So I went to hide myself for more than 10 months, and after that, I have no any option to stay in Sudan, okay?
Fleeing their homes, many Sudanese seek asylum in Israel, but the local bureaucratic process appears geared against them, and thus far none have officially been recognized as refugees. In a desperate cry for help, the Darfuri community in Israel organized a commemoration event, including the participation of their brothers who are locked up in the southern detention facility of Holot.
I think what initiatives like this can help with is to help locally, to help with the public in Israel, with decision makers in Israel, to understand the distress that these people experience.
As emerging reports of gruesome rapes and murders continue to reach those who have fled the region, they try, with the little means they have, to capture the world's attention and bring an end to the brutal violence raging their homeland.
We're going to Germany. A former Nazi death camp officer dubbed the bookkeeper of Auschwitz went on trial in Germany today. 93-year-old Oskar Gröning faces 300,000 separate counts of accessory to murder. He is charged with sorting and counting money taking from those killed in the extermination camp. He also performed so-called ramp duty, guarding the luggage stolen from deportees as they arrived at Auschwitz. During today's proceedings, Gröning said that he was guilty in moral terms. Yes. For the last 18 years, Aryeh Rosenberg has been traveling some of the world's most remote areas. His mission, as he sees it, to commemorate his son who was killed in a military aviation accident. I-24 News correspondent Uri Shapira brings us his moving story.
Aryeh Rosenberg will never forget the night of February 4, 1997. While traveling with his wife in Argentina, he found out that his son Shachar was killed in the biggest military aviation disaster in Israel's history, which saw 2 military helicopters crash in northern Israel while on their way to Lebanon, leaving 73 soldiers dead. Like many other parents who lost their sons, Aryeh's first reaction was one of shock and despair.
When you receive the first news of the death of your son, you find yourself free-falling into a deep hole of depression. You lose the will to live. You constantly blame yourself for not protecting your child, and you must find a way to climb out of this hole.
From this agonizing low point, Rosenberg took commemorating his son to a different level. In one of his letters, Shachar had expressed a desire to see his parents carry on his legacy in case he died in the line of duty by traveling to the places he wanted to go. Aryeh took up the challenge.
My first purpose was to see through his eyes, to smell through his nose, to taste through his mouth. Another purpose was to honor his memory. Young Israelis tend to go on a long trip after the military service. And every time I returned from a trip, I wrote a book about my journey. I know that many young people love them.
For more than 18 years, he has traveled the world to the most deserted places. Sometimes this journey took him to places he couldn't even imagine.
I was on the border between Mexico and Guatemala, and there was heavy rain. I was staring at the sky, looking for a sign of my son. Suddenly, God answered my prayer, and I saw two images in the sky. One of my son Shachar, the other of my cousin. But before I could say Jack Robinson, the image of Shachar disappeared. I turned to God and asked him why. Why did you take him from me?
While Aya is not getting any younger, he continues to travel. Sometimes what seems like the end of the road is really the beginning of a new journey.
And with me on set is correspondent and author Ayman Sikse. Good evening.
Good evening, Lucy.
Good to have you here. And today you're bringing us a story, a book from Africa.
Yes.
We're talking about Africa.
We're talking about Africa a lot recently, and we're talking about what happens to people who leave Africa. But this book by Tom Burgess, The Looting Machine, wants to explain to us what happens before they leave. Why do they leave? Mm-hmm. And Africa is, as we know, the poorest continent in the world, but also, paradoxically, it's also the richest. It's the richest in minerals, and one of these minerals, maybe the most famous one, is coltan, which is used in all of our mobile phones, our smartphones, our laptops, by Apple and other corporations. And what's happening in the book is he tries to explain to us how does a continent that have so much of this precious mineral and others become so poor and remain so poor.
How come, really?
Well, what happens...
Because what? We take their resources and we don't give back?
We take their resources, and what we give back to the wrong people. Multinational corporations have basically joined hands with the moguls in Africa, with the monopolies there, and people who are already in power, like the president of Guinea, and all the gains that are coming in from mining, which is done in very, very dangerous conditions. Many people die while mining for these minerals, is going to the powerful. And this really explains to us how the disaster that we saw a few days ago in the Mediterranean, how it can happen.
You know what's driving me crazy is that this continent is so rich with minerals, like you said, and so rich in general. How can it allow itself to see people who are starving? I don't understand it.
Well, the people who are in power in Africa have an interest to maintain the situation. That's what this book proves to us.
To get more money from the West?
To get more money from the West, but also the West has an interest in seeing this happen because we can take advantage of the resources of Africa in a very, very low cost while this happens. And when you think about that, the mobile phone you're using, the oil in your car, comes from Africa and has driven people to the Mediterranean to get to Sicily, and we know how that ended. It's really an enlightening read and experience in this book.
Yes, yes, definitely. Ayman Sikse. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lucy.
Yes. And we're going to an incredible story. Rivka Ravitz is many things: a mother, educator, and a trailblazing ultra-Orthodox woman who has risen to one of the most prominent positions in Israeli politics. I-24 News correspondent Shachar Peled met with the modern-day Renaissance woman.
They say that behind every powerful man stands a strong woman. This is truly the case for Israeli President Reuven Rivlin and his chief of staff, Rivka Ravitz. By Rivlin's side for the past 16 years, many consider Ravitz as the engine behind his recent presidential victory.
I knew it will be a hard work, and I knew he will be the president.
At 39 years old, Ravitz is a mother of 11 children. She holds degrees in both computer science and politics and is working on her PhD in public policy. And yes, she also runs the president's office.
Sometimes people tell me, how do you do that? How your family sees it, and it's not easy, but I don't, here in the office and in the work, I don't feel different.
Ravitz is also the first Haredi or ultra-Orthodox woman to land such a high-level position.
She's a pioneer. She proved it's possible to keep the Haredi way of life without any compromises, and on the other hand, to integrate into the public arena.
There have been no shortage of challenges, though, especially given Rivlin's term began at the same time as last summer's fighting with Hamas.
We started his duty straight into funerals and condolence visits and we met all those great families one by one.
We meet Ravitz on a special day, the first time her daughters visit her at the presidential office.
I got married very early. I was 18 and a half. I gave birth early too.
Before moving into politics, Ravitz was a teacher, a passion she recently decided to revive and also fit into her busy schedule.
My father-in-law called me to help him in the office, and it was just a better salary than teaching. So I stayed there, and I left my dream about being a teacher. And then, like 6 or 7 years ago, I got back to that dream.
Back at home, Ravitz is first and foremost a mother. Surrounded by her own small football team, it's clear she also has to make some personal sacrifices.
בדרך כלל זה אבא, זה נכון, אני מסכימה. היא מסגירה אותי.
There's no doubt that the children are paying a certain price because both parents are occupied in a complex public workplace.
Despite her critical role in Israeli politics, some in Ravitz's community object to being represented by women.
I think that will change, but it will change with the years. It can't be forced on the Haredi community.
Is it something that interests you?
It's interesting to me, and I think it's very important. It's the right place to change things.
Balancing tradition and modernity, along with the challenges they present, the Israeli president's chief of staff is living proof that everything is possible.
Everything is possible. Just a pleasure to see this. And now to sports. Jonathan.
Yes.
Hello.
Hello, Lucy.
All good?
All good. Yourself?
Everybody's expecting us to say, Go. Bayern Munich eliminated?
Perhaps. Big night tonight in the Champions League. First, there's Barcelona, PSG. That tie is probably decided. Barcelona won 3-1 in Paris. But Bayern Munich lost 3-1 in Portugal, meaning they have to win 2-0 or more than that. Anything else will see them out. Now, Bayern Munich is seen as one of the top 3 clubs in Europe, together with Barcelona and Real Madrid. Seeing them eliminated in the quarterfinals by a team such as Porto, which is good, but not that good, would be a major surprise. If Porto get 1 away goal, that would mean Bayern Munich would have to score 3 just to send it to overtime. Again, 2-0 for Bayern Munich, it's possible. The previous round, they did a goalless draw in Ukraine, then won 7-0 at home. This is Bayern Munich, and they absolutely can do it, but it's a big pressure on them right now.
Yeah, we're going to our next subject. We started talking about is the Boston attack, about the sentence, and you're talking something.
The 2015 Boston Marathon was run yesterday. It was won by Lalisa Desisa from Kenya. He's very, very beloved in Boston because he also won it in 2013. Back then, 2 years ago, crossed the line just a few minutes before the bombs blew off. Back then, he dedicated the win to the city, and therefore he's very, very loved by the community. In Boston, once again, he won. I think the biggest win is the fact that the marathon is run again. Tens of thousands of people running. That's the big win. And Boston strong, as they say in America. Boston strong indeed.
Boston strong. Talk to me, Bizarre.
Yeah, that's what we bring you for. I know. Polo is the sport of royals. Prince Charles plays polo, always with royals in the stands with their hats. I don't know how many royals would come to the Segway Polo World Championship, which took place in the UK, of course, this past weekend.
How long it exists?
For about a decade.
To have a world championship for this.
The sport. This is the first world championship. The sport exists for about a decade. That's as far as Segway exists, as far as I remember. 16 teams competed, and it's a fun event. Segway polo. I don't know if Prince Charles would play polo, but
we have downstairs. Take me once.
Of course, we'll play polo here downstairs. I wonder who will win.
Jonathan Regev.
What were you thinking?
Jonathan Regev, thank you very much.
Thank you, Lucy.
2 minutes, I'll be back.